Okay, welcome to everyone on Play Chess and on stream for YouTube. I thought we could go over some key games from the Reykjavik Open, in particular looking at Li Chao, one of the top Chinese players, who's currently FIDE 2700. I thought some of his games were really interesting. So the first game I'd like to show you is his game against Francisco Restuccia, I assume an Italian player. Only 2093, but let's see what happens to this 2093. So this is in round 3. D4 from Li Chao. And now we see a King's Engine actually being adopted by Francisco. So King's Engine defense. And we see after D6 the Makagonov system with H3. Black now castles, and we see Knight F3. And after E5, D5. And often Black wants to entrench a knight on C5 in this position. And to do this, it will help if it's not kicked with B4. So Black now plays A5, knowing that the knight can come to C5 without being kicked. White now uses that H3 move to gain a bit of space on the king side and discourage a potential F5 from Black later. So G4. It seems a little bit on the ambitious side to move so many pawns, but Black's been clamped down for the moment. Knight A6, Bishop E3. Now Knight C5 does actually put pressure on E4. I don't think White's interested in taking on C5 and trying to win a pawn, because his king's in the centre. He doesn't really want to give up his dark square bishop either. So for the moment he just protects the E4 pawn, and Black plays C6. So is Black going to get sufficient counterplay? Well, Bishop E2, Knight Fd7, as though maybe F5 is on the cards, but with G takes and then a potential Rook G1 later, does Black really want a pin on the bishop? White's king hasn't settled. White's king could actually castle queenside with just minimal preparation here. So White plays H4, not really fearing that Black's going to play F5. I mean, he would welcome that G file. Black now plays A4, and after Queen C2, it looks as though White's going to be castling queenside. Now I think here Black maybe is not helping his own counterplay by playing this next move A3, because really you want to open lines against the king. With A3 it looks as though there's going to be some problems ahead if Black's trying to open lines after this next move B4. We see Knight A6, and actually here a technically accurate move appears to be being played here in Queen A4, actually just pinning the knight to the rook for the moment. C5, and now B5 is played, forcing, well, it would seem almost encouraging Knight C7 here. I think anything else, that there might be Queen A5 in this position, and that might be embarrassing. I haven't really engine checked this, but now Knight C7 Queen takes, so I think Black has to play virtually Knight C7 to attack the queen. White drops the queen back, and you see that the side of the board's been blocked up. And the thing is, there's actually a potentially losing liability in this position, this pawn on A3. But does White want to try and lock out the king side first before going for this pawn? Let's see what happened. Knight B6. No real problems with Knight B6 just yet. White castles queenside. Bishop D7. Now Rook Dg1. Queen B8. And usually you'd think White would want to try and open up the lines. But actually we see H5. And after Queen A7. Rook G3, F6, and does White really want to open up this H file? Well, actually White plays F4. The problem for Black here is if takes, bishop takes, we're exposing pressure on D6. These knights are quite far away from reaching this E5 square to try and make use of E5. So I'm not sure in this position it's in Black's favour to play E takes F4. So Black actually plays Knight A4, and instead of opening up lines, White just closes this king side with F5, of course hemming in this bishop, dramatically. Unless this bishop's going to later crawl out like this, it's going to take a long time to do anything useful. Black takes on c3, queen takes c3, and now g5, imprisoning the bishop. h6, putting the bishop on h8, not opening any lines. And the amusing thing is, unless the rest of the score sheet has disappeared, the amusing thing is here on move 26, after knight b1, black actually resigned. I know it looks as though nothing much has happened, but really black doesn't seem to have any counterplay. This is not the sort of game you'd normally see on YouTube between 2700s. No, this is a 2700 against someone less than 2100, but it appears as though this a3 pawn is doomed. For example, king c2, bishop c1, and we'd have, you know, all this pressure on a3, and it's a near certain win. In fact, this other rook could even join in just in case. Then once the a file's taken over, well, it's a gradual win, but black, I don't know, must have resigned here. So I thought it was interesting to point out this game. It seems as though black, though, doesn't have any counterplay to speak here. I don't think there's an immediate win or anything. I think it's just winning the a3 pawn is going to spell black's doom later. So black just resigned here, I suppose saving energy for the next round. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Let's have a look at another game now of the eventual winner, Li Chao. So here his opponent is actually even lower rated at 1710, believe it or not, John Ontiveros. So Li Chao is playing white. But actually this is perhaps a more fighting game than that one. Black actually played, so this is in this system here, this aggressive theoretical line, knight g5, d5, this gambit. So black actually gets at least a little bit of counterplay theoretically from this gambit. White takes, after c6 white took, and dropped the bishop back to d3, bishop c5. So at least black has piece play. Knight c3, and we see h6. And the knight actually drops back to e4 here, hitting the bishop actually. So knight takes, the bishop's being hit, bishop b6. And if black gets time, actually f5 might be handy, but it's not given time because of b4 hitting the knight. The knight goes to b7. And now bishop b2. And I'm not entirely sure that f5 is at all useful for black here. Because I think something like knight g3 looks fair enough, and if e4, then we're just extending the scope of the bishop along the diagonal, as well as providing bishop c4 check. So here we see bishop d4 and c3. Bishop goes to b6. And then bishop c4, well, the queen was attacking that bishop there. King moves, so unpinning the pawn as though f5 might be on the cards. But now d4, f5 now is played. Knight c5, knight d6, hitting the bishop. The bishop drops back to e2, and black commits his structure a bit with e4. f4, this structure is quite fixed, and you know, sometimes this can be quite vulnerable if white can later undermine the structure, maybe at f5 later, but obviously his king safety needs to be factored in. But this might be a good blockade square as well. With this fixed structure, it's also hemming in the bishop, so there's something to, it's a double-edged sword, this structure, although it gains a bit of space there, and this seemingly aggressive wedge, you know, it's a bit fixed, the structure. Knight b7, and now we see c4, and also this diagonal looks a bit dangerous. Bishop c7. And in fact, one advantage of the f4 pawn, it actually helps on that diagonal to be a bit safer. And so d5, bishop b6. Okay, that looks vulnerable. It's protected with bishop d4. And black plays c takes, And black cannot take on d5 because a bishop takes g7 check would win the queen. We see knight d6, which looks like a nice blockade of that d pawn. King h1. But white does seem to have a very, very pleasant position here. You see about the fixed structure, how black's counterplay is kind of minimal again now, unfortunately. And this knight on c5 is a bit of a pain. Bishop d7. In fact, white has a 2-to-1 pawn majority just here, and he plays a4. Rook c8. a5. Black's starting to feel the squeeze. Bishop takes c5. And now bishop takes c5 is played, pinning the knight to the rook for the moment. Rook f6, but also now winning that pawn. And we've got a 2-to-0 pawn majority, which is quite handy. So black has been outplayed. Knight b5. Bishop drops back to d4. Rook d6. Bishop e5 protecting the pawn as well as hitting the rook. Rook goes to g6. Queen d2 is played in this position. Okay, and this leaves actually a horrible bishop h5 lurking in the background here as well, which might be useful at some point. Bishop e8, rook ac1, challenging that c file. Black takes, white takes. Queen h4. I don't think there's anything really seriously being threatened by black here. So white just offers the exchange of queens. I mean, he's got this pawn majority. If he just exchanges queens, this is going to be even more significant. Queen takes, rook takes. Now black played knight d6, which actually blocks the rook. Whoops, and this is approaching move 40, so I guess it's a time trouble blunder. Now bishop h5 actually embarrasses the rook. And black had to resign here. Black's losing anyway, but black resigned here. So that was just in an early round. In fact, I think this was round 2 actually. So this was against an amateur player, John, but by Lee Chao standards, amateur player, just 1700 player. But it was in the Reykjavik Open, and I think the fun of opens is you do get a wide variety of opposition, as sometimes depending on how they do the pairings. So let's have a look at another game now. The opposition gets a bit harder now in this next game. A 2-4-6-3 was playing white against Liu Chao. Okay, this is in round 4. Louis Gallego, 2-4-6-3 playing white against Li Chao 2700. So e4, and Li Chao plays the Sicilian defense. Knight f3 d6, and then white plays knight c3, a bit of a bit unusual rather than d4. Knight f6, and now g3. So it doesn't look that ambitious for white, this particular system. Knight c6, putting more pressure on the dark squares. Bishop g2, g6. It looks fairly logical, black setup. d4. Black takes on d4, knight takes, queen takes, and then bishop g7. And I would think a safe option for white would just be to castle kingside. And instead, white played bishop g5 with the option of castling queenside. Now black just castles kingside. I don't know how many of you would actually castle queenside here, or consider it. For the moment, he doesn't castle. He still plays. He plays queen d2, as though bishop h6 is going to be useful to take out this bishop. Now queen b6 is played, which I guess is very annoying actually, on b2. What does white want to do here? Tactically, what is actually going on here with rook b1? I just want to put on a Qb8 here, if I can. Nope, I can't. Can I? No, I can. Add Qb8. this might be playable. Rook b1 might be playable. I'm just wondering about rook b1. Because instead of rook b1, to be honest, this looks just so dangerous. What black played, what white played here. I can't believe that white played this. He's 2463. He actually castled queenside. It just looks as though, you know, this is just, for me, it just looks as though it's wrong, because that c file just seems just ready and waiting for black's attack. So I don't know what white was thinking here. I think just rook b1 and try and castle kingside looks a lot safer, at least to me. So white castled queenside. The engine did suggest I think rook b1 was safer anyway. So now bishop e6. It just looks pretty unsafe, this side of the board. Bishop e3, and the queen goes to a6. It just looks incredibly comfortable for black, this attacking formation. It's like an improved version of the Sicilian dragon, with white not really having this ferocious h-file attack, with black ready to land some punches quite quickly on c3 and stuff like that. White played a3, and I just think, wow, really? I just couldn't believe this game. I don't know about you guys, but this just looks just too unsafe for white. Rook fc8. So already there seems to be a threat of rook takes c3, and if queen takes, we've got knight takes e4 already. I mean, it just looks really dangerous. So bishop d4 at least stops that kind of thing for the moment. Now, you know, a dynamic aggressive move, not wasting any time with rook b8, as though this diagonal might be a problem for e5. Black actually just lashes out here quite efficiently with b5. So I guess this has all been worked out that e5 doesn't work out very well. Well, I think black can just, for example, just take here. If e5, I think minimum, just d takes and just take here, and we're on the c3. So this looks impossible. So b5 looks fairly logical and fairly quick. Just to threaten b4. The bishop goes to f1 here, pinning that pawn for a moment. Rook ab8. Okay, king b1. So for the moment, it looks as though white is holding the fort somehow, even if he has to make these retreating moves. Is this actually possible for white to get something from this position? Black now switches his attention actually to Lee's light squares with bishop g4, funny enough. And this is kind of weakness to the last move, because it actually left f3. And the problem is here, I know this is ridiculous, because it's not about the king side for the moment. If the rook moves, I think a move like bishop f3 could actually be useful here, but there might be something even stronger. In the game, white actually played bishop takes f6. Actually, let's just see this just to make sure. If rook e1, bishop f3 is apparently a good idea, but the main issue is also e5 actually. So bishop e3, queen b7 on e4, and yeah, without f3 being possible, what does white do about the e4 square? If bishop, say bishop g5, b4, and this attack is crashing through, it just looks horrendous. So yeah, bishop g4 adds serious doubt now to white's setup here. So white played bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, threatening structural damage. Knight gets out of there. Whoops. Knight gets out of there with knight d5. But yeah, he's just left the rook to be taken, and that is taken. It does seem a major disaster, really. Queen takes d1. Queen a4 is played, unpinning the pawn, basically. So now that b4 is on the cards. And in fact, after f3, b4 is played. And yeah, white's been torn apart here. He just resigned in this position. I just thought that was odd. Really odd. But yeah, I think people must get freaked out by playing people like 200 points higher than them. There's a lot of psychology in chess. I'm not sure a player with white would have played like that against someone of their own rating. It just seems strange to give like a fixed target to white, to black's attack so easily there. Strange game. So anyway, let's carry on. So now let's get on to the heavy guns playing each other. So Bassem Armin, a very strong GM now. So 2657 was playing against Li Chao. So this is heavy duty stuff now. In round 8. And this is a really interesting game actually. Bassem Armin had also played one of the other very, very strong players in the tournament, Eric Hansen, and actually defeated Eric Hansen prior to this game with quite a quiet opening system. Remarkably quiet for someone of Bassem's rating, and he likes his King's Engine attack style openings. So G3, and we have this B3 as well. Bishop B2. Actually, I'll turn off the Kibitzer. Whoops. C5. C4. Okay, English opening now by transposition. Bishop G2. And black commits D5 hole here, but does blunt this bishop on B2. So Li Chao is blunting Bassem's bishop for the moment. Both sides now castle. D3. Knight C6. Knight C3. And black now plays H6. I mean, this is the sort of thing which I like doing. Just you give up the D5 square a bit, but you've got this kind of bind on the D4 square, and you look forward to sort of moving your F pawn later after you move the knight. So knight E1, bishop E6, which has an idea that maybe D5 is on the cards, or queen D7 and bishop H3. Knight D5 is played, and actually we see queen D7 as though bishop H3 might be on the cards. And in fact, after knight C2, it is actually played, which usually softens up white's king position a bit. Knight takes F6, bishop takes, queen D2, knight H6, but for the moment, bishop takes G2, king takes, and bishop drops back to protect H6. And now white works on the queen side a little bit with B4. Black seals up the queen side with B6, keeps that solid. E4. But now with E4 and without a light square bishop, this F5, F4 does seem more lucrative, especially if you can get a pawn to F3, that's often decisive. So F5 is played. Bassem plays F3, and now we see F4. But now there's some method to the madness of white to play G4, because he's not worried about blocking in a bishop here, clearly. If he can keep solid, I can see the idea that this should be okay, potentially for white, that he's not getting mated immediately. But black now makes use of the fact that these squares are kind of weakened, these dark squares are weakened. This bishop can wriggle out and exploit that with bishop F6, going into that H4 square, potentially. Bishop C3. And in fact, after H5, black would like to kind of treble these pieces, you know, something like this sort of stuff, you know, get the queen in for a trebling. If we have a trebling for HG, it makes HG more effective. It's a great plan to use. So H3, king F7. So this rook is now free to get behind the H pawn for HG to be more effective. The key is in the timing. What you do is you build up behind HG all your artillery. Okay, so like a little mini war strategy here. So you build up all the artillery, the heavy artillery here, and you play HG later. So we'll see that in action now. So B5, hitting the knight, knight E7, queen F2, and now rook H8. Rook H1, and now building up with rook H7. So the other rook can come behind this rook, a4, rook ah8, rook ag1, and now the queen really wants to help these two rooks as well, so we see rook h6, making space on h7. The bishop holds against g5 and discourages h4, so it's holding these two squares for the moment. a5. Actually, does the queen want to come here or here? Well, actually, after this move, it looks as though the queen might be coming here in some way. Bishop e1. I know this looks quite patient maneuvering, but it's justified because the position is so blocked up here that black can do this. Queen c8. So the queen's going to park over here soon, potentially. White does close up the queen side totally, actually. He forgets about opening lines here. He just plays a6. So maybe white was content to try and lock the position down and aim for a draw here. Black, though, in this position immediately now plays hg. White plays hg. If he plays fg, technically that does create a passed pawn here. And also bishop h4 is still on the cards. And you might think also, if you exchange off the bishops here, then g5, knight g6 to h4 is going to be a pain later as well. So anyway, hg is played. And queen h8, so treble. Actually, that's technically an Alekhine's gun, because the queen is actually behind the two rooks. So Alekhine's gun. Alekhine's gun. Okay, so this is a big threat now. Rook h2 check. So white takes on h6, rook takes h6. The damage does seem to have been done already now. White really hasn't given himself any queenside counterplay, and his king's in the wrong location here, it seems, because now it's a bit too late. King f1, rook h2. And this is really tricky. I'll just add a bit to here, because it would seem as though rook g2 intuitively should have something going for it. But let's see what the precise continuation is. On rook g2, it's queen h3. And black is going to play then bishop h4. And it's going to be quite painful. For example, bishop d2, bishop h4. If the queen goes here, then rook h1 is mate. So this is pretty bad news, actually, after rook g2. That queen h3 is quite crushing. So unfortunately, this does look pretty diabolical now for white. White actually tries to sacrifice his queen to create a fortress with queen g2. But black now makes sure things are kept a little bit open by playing d5. After c takes, now takes the queen. King takes, and now opens up the position a bit more with knight takes d5. So that's a way in for the queen here. After e takes, queen d8. It's going to be taking that pawn, and there's going to be loads of targets to munch up pretty soon after that. And in fact, Bassem wasn't that pleased with his position. Here, he resigns here. White resigned. Let's have a look at a possible continuation then. So, say bishop f2. Queen takes d5. We're on d3 immediately. Rook d1. We can play queen b3. We're hitting these guys. Rook d2. We can take this. Then we're on this. Everything's dropping. Basically, we've got the passed pawns now, and it just gets worse and worse. We can start using the passed pawns. It's over. So anyway, yeah, Bassem seems to have overclosed the position on the queen side, and maybe underestimated the strength of black's trebling, the Alekhine gun construction. I thought it made the game actually pretty neat. This game, this Alekhine's gun. When you see an Alekhine's gun being prepared like that, I thought that was pretty neat. Okay, so let's have a look at another game. Now this is against another very, very strong opponent in round 9, Richard Rapport. So Lee Chao was playing white, and we have d4. Actually, I'll turn off the Qb8 for a moment. Knight f6, c4, g6. Actually, we have a king's engine defense. e4, d6, and now his move from an earlier round, the Makhachkov system, h3. Black castled, knight f3, knight a6, bishop e3, e5, d5. Now black plays for a fast f5 potentially, with f5 on the cards already, or knight f4 could be handy in some variations. But there's always g3 with this bishop on f1. g3 is always in reserve here for the moment. White is not keen to necessarily move this bishop either for the moment, because it will help support h3 if g3 is going to kick this knight without h3 being a problem. White plays a3 after c6, b4, gaining some space on the queen side. Black plays c5 now, encouraging white perhaps to try and close the position. But white actually plays knight d2 here. He doesn't mind black potentially snapping this pawn off. I think there's a technical snag with this. Let's have a quick look actually at c takes, a takes, knight takes. This position, I think this should be okay for white. You can actually even just take on. No, I don't think taking on a7. I think c5 is more thematic. So yeah, he's left the c pawn. He's left that b pawn on. It hasn't been taken. Black actually just played b6 instead, and we see rook b1, bishop d7. g3, bishop e8, and now white plays b5, so he's not interested in opening lines necessarily on the queen side. The knight goes to c7, bishop e2 targeting that knight. Black though plays quite dynamically here. By the way, I hope the chat's still working over there. Black plays quite dynamically. He doesn't move the knight back. No, he plays the aggressive f5. So this is an aggressive way of playing the position. E takes. Now really aggressive move from Richard Rapport. Knight f4. So he's trying to exploit this loose knight potentially on c3 and open up his bishop on that c3. White actually does take that after e takes. Okay, we've got two pieces attacked. Bishop takes. And instead of taking immediately here, rook takes f5. So we've still got two pieces attacked. Bishop drops back, allowing this knight to be taken. And white simply just castles here. White's doing okay. Technically the engine's like white here a little bit. So white out of all this has done okay. It looks as though, I don't know if this knight's in the right place, or black's queen counterplay is not really convincing here. Black tries a6. For the moment, bishop g4, and black doesn't move the rook. I think if he moves the rook, he's in big trouble, actually, I suspect. Just knight e4, and he's in big trouble on d6, potentially. I don't think bishop e5 doesn't, it looks absolutely terrible. We can just take this and maybe just d6. It looks terrible, and then there's bishop e6 after when this knight moves. Well, where's the knight going, in fact? So anyway, no. Black actually has to lose that rook here. This is probably the best in the circumstance to play a takes. White, though, doesn't even take the rook. He actually goes for the d6 pawn with knight e4, and he's hitting that bishop, of course. Bishop d4 is played. Very complicated position, but it's in White's favour here. Bishop takes f5, going the exchange up. And then taking on d6, it looks really good for the moment. Apparently, a good idea for Black was to play Queen G5 here. Apparently, that seems to be one of the better moves here, according to Houdini, to play Queen G5. What is going on here? Queen G5. What is Black actually threatening? Queen takes G3. That F pawn being pinned. What would White do? If he plays something like Queen F3. Bishop H5, and it seems Black's getting some sort of counterplay, believe it or not. Yeah, that does seem as though things are coordinating here. But no, Black didn't play Queen G5. Black actually played Bishop G6. Now, actually, Knight takes B5 actually threatens to get rid of that lovely bishop. So Knight takes B5, Rook takes. And you might think, well, isn't Queen G5 useful here? It wasn't played, in fact. I'm not sure it's as good here. Let's have a quick look. Queen G5 here. Queen F3. And I think the slight snag with this stuff is Queen F4. And White's just much better there. So anyway, Black actually played Rook takes A3, so threatening Rook takes G3 check, still using that pin. Rook B3 defends against that. Bishop H5 attacking the Queen. And you might think, well, it's actually trying to deflect the Queen away from the Rook, but White actually happily does that. He doesn't mind losing the Rook. He plays Queen takes H5. After Rook takes B3, there's still this threat of Rook takes G3 check here. White plays King H2, and he's got this G file now to work with. Potentially, Rook G1 is now on the cards, or even Rook E1 for Rook E8. So after all this complications, it still seems White, equal on pawns here, has two very dangerous attacking moves available. Black plays Queen F6, which might be one of the better moves in the circumstance, to try and maybe seal up things with Queen G6, if Rook E1 Queen G6. But White pounces on E8 with Queen E8 check. I think this is one of the more accurate moves actually, Queen E8 check. Yeah. So Queen F8, Queen E6 check, Queen F7. And now makes use of this lovely G file with Rook G1. And this is a bit horrible now because Bishop E5 with mating 4 is threatened. Bishop E5 check. So what does Black actually want to do here? Well, he took on E6, giving White that really dangerous passed pawn, only 2 squares away from winning. And there's also Bishop D6 to deprive the king of F8, and that would be check. And here actually Black resigned. Black resigned here. I think this is a bit of a problem, this E6 pawn, because if King F8, then actually Bishop D6 is a mate in 2, because the pawn is actually forming part of a mating net here. After Rook G8 is checkmate. So I'm not sure what to suggest for Black. The engine is suggesting that Black is busted here with this pawn. If Rook B2, let's try and get behind the pawn. And well, the problem is the discovered checks. Bishop E5 discovered check. Bishop D6 is still going into that mating net there. So that was a really exciting game. Very, very complicated against 2681. So tactical chaos was kind of created by Richard, reports, but in the end, yeah, it seemed as though he couldn't. You know, this was big trouble. This position here. If you think, you know, what could black have done? If you might think king h8 in this position, bishop e5 check is very strong apparently. Bishop takes, queen takes. This position, take on f5. White's threatening again rook e1 or rook g1. This rook's just not so relevant right now against these two things. So it's like the queen and this rook is working much better than the queen and this rook. You might think, well, what about, say, rook b2? Does that tie down white at all? Not really. The queen's protecting f2, so rook e1 is on the cards. It just looks as though the position was busted, really. Yeah, from here, it's from this deflection, it looks as though this backfires, this bishop h5. But black was already in trouble here. If he didn't play bishop h5, we could rerun this back and back. If black had played rook a7, you know, he's still in a worse position, slightly. With b6 under fire, queen e2, queen f6. I mean, bishop f4 to stop the dynamism. And again, well, rook e1, white dominates the file. I mean, white was better anyway. He's got this passed pawn. He's got pressure on b6. So anyway, very, very difficult game for black. Now let's look at another great player who performed really well in the tournament. Eric Hansen, Canada's top-rated player at the moment, playing the Germany #1 player, Arkady Nardich, playing white. This is a really interesting game. Eric Hansen playing black. So I think Eric came second equal with three others. So Nardich playing white played e4. And we have the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, e6. The g3. Yeah, this is quite popular to avoid the mainline Sicilians, this sort of thing. Knight c6, bishop g2. Knight f6, queen e2. And black compromises the d5 square here for a lockdown on d4. Knight a3. Sometimes this implies this sort of knight maneuver to get to these two key squares. d6, c3, or even, yeah, here. Bishop e7, both sides castle. d3. Black plays rook e8. Knight c4. Bishop f8. The bishop can fianchetto slowly here, if needed. Knight e3. h6. After knight h4, it looks as though f5 is useful, but it's taken away from white. g6. King h1. And now the bishop does fianchetto basically manually. Bishop d2. So it looks like a standard King's Engine attack sort of position. Rook b8. Now black's classic sort of counterplay might be something like this, you'd think. Rook a e1, b5. And white plays f4 here. For the moment, it looks as though there's a loose knight on c6. So this has to be factored in, you'd think. But black does take on f4 after g takes. This gets very, very interesting indeed. And I think this is a very interesting new concept. I hadn't seen this before. Yeah. With this knight loose, I mean, I think maybe some players would be a bit concerned about that and try and do something about that. Like bishop d7 is actually mentioned by the engine here. Just against this e5, you know, hitting these guys. But black comes up with c4, which is logical for undermining the pawn chain. But what about this e5? So e5 is played, and the point is revealed that black, and this is really quite amazing actually, black actually played d takes e5 So one pawn being sacrificed for the knight. But d3 is under fire. But what about the rook? Well, the rook can move and also attack the bishop. So after bishop g2, now two pawns, with the third pawn still being attacked, but hitting the knight. White takes that, so one pawn. But there's also g5 now available. As well as another thing is available, knight h5 hitting the rook. We're still on d3 here, so we're going to get a second pawn for the knight. Rook g4, and now the second pawn, c takes d3. So it's a piece for two pawns, and already engines suggest that black is at least equal after queen f3. Black is at least equal here. So a fascinating concept that this whole center has been blown apart. All the center pawns have been blown apart here, and there's this dangerous looking pawn on d3. White concretely doesn't seem to be threatening too much on the king side. This seems to be a fairly solid construction here. With the rook on e6, it looks as though also this bishop b7 is going to be useful to try and weaken white's king, and the e file is going to be useful for this pin here. Black actually played bishop b7. We see queen h3, and in fact not taking her immediately, just intensifying the e file pressure in that pin with queen e8 is played. So nice battery there. Because there might have been something useful like knight f5 on the cards, but now, you know, the pin ties down the knight. Bishop takes b7, and we see rook takes b7, as though maybe even the horrible, you know, trebling. We've got an Alekhine's gun construction here on the center file if rook be7 is going to occur. And in fact, we do get an Alekhine's gun, because rook gg1 is played, so black, two pawns for the piece, gets the Alekhine's gun in the center. Rook be7, Alekhine's gun. Wow. Is the knight really pinned? Is this knight really pinned? Well, actually, knight eg2 is played. The knight is actually able to defend here. We've got a few defenses on e1. So for the moment, it doesn't seem profitable to take on e1. Black actually plays queen d7. Now, technically, the engine suggests white's still, you know, okay, maybe slightly better, in fact. I mean, he has got an extra piece. But the thing is, black has got this prospect of getting another nasty pin here. If the queen comes here, it's actually pinning that knight and also eyeing this queenside pawn, which might not seem that significant. But the thing is, with black's king kind of safe here, if black can get an extra pawn, you know, 3 pawns for the knight, that would be really interesting. It's difficult to suggest, though, that white's position is easy to play. I think white's position has become quite difficult to play because there's no actual loose targets for black, for white to smash black's king side up here in particular. White tries rook takes e6. After rook takes e6, I mean, this queen's a bit of a liability here. You know, we could lose the queen with rook e1 because rook takes is with checking and then winning the queen. So we can't challenge that central file. So white plays actually here knight f5, at least looking at this knight being a bit loose. Now in this position, we see queen d5 pinning that knight. And also it looks as though rook e2 is useful as well as attacking this knight, of course, by the way. Rook e2. We see knight fe3 hitting the queen, encouraging the winning of the third pawn, though. I don't know what to suggest for white here. If he had played knight takes g7, then actually it seems king g7, and although white is piece up, he's actually really tied down here. Rook e2 is going to amplify the pressure. If the rook moved, this is no good. We can just take this and then d2. That pawn's pretty useful. So white's quite tied down. So anyway, we see knight fe3 giving up another pawn. So it's 3 pawns for the piece. Yet despite this, is actually still it's only slightly better for black now, technically, according to Houdini here. Knight d1 is suggested as an idea. That seems to just protect b2, but instead queen f3 was played. I think white's intending something on the king side here, but for the moment loses another pawn, so it's 4 pawns now for the piece. 3, 4, 5, 6. Only 2 pawns left for white. 4 pawns for the piece. Rook d1, knight f6, and it does seem as though knight e4 now is on the cards on that poor bishop. Knight f4. The rook drops back, and again knight e4 just seems like a powerful move to have to face here. If knight takes d3, well, this actually in the circumstance might be the best move actually. Knight takes d3. That wasn't played. Knight takes d3. I don't think it fails tactically to anything in particular. It is hitting the queen. This is approaching move 40. Maybe white was in time pressure or something. It looks as though this is reasonable for white, but he didn't play that. He actually played queen c6. Maybe he's trying to create some pressure with knight ed5 on f6 and e8. Black now played queen b3, and this actually now threatens rook takes e3 with queen takes d1. The rook gets out of the way, and now we see rook f8. It's quite a tense, imbalanced position, and apparently it's just a slight advantage to black, if anything, according to engines here. So very complicated. Probably this next move, it looks a bit suspect. h4. It does weaken white's king in theory, one would think, to play h4. Queen a4, and already the knight's kind of virtually pinned to that h4 pawn. But no, the knight can drop back and protect it. Apparently this is not so hot, this move. In this position, apparently best for white was c4. That actually makes sure the the pawn's pinned to the queen here, and this apparently it's still okay for white. This might be actually the decisive mistake, one of the decisive mistakes. Knight fg2. Because knight e4 now, why has this suddenly gone to nearly +5 after knight e4? What is black actually threatening? Well, it seems knight g3 check is a problem, and knight takes d2 is a problem. And if something like rook d1, you might ask, then knight f2 is a problem. So this knight e4 does seem like a really dangerous move here to face. So if white had played c4, he would have cut out this knight e4. The queen wouldn't have been protecting the knight, so that would have been covered. But no, we see now this knight e4. White is in big trouble now. He played bishop e1. This is at move 38, approaching that move 40 time control, I guess. d2. Black is winning the piece back. He's going to be like 4 pawns up if he can win his piece back. White plays h5. Black just wins his piece back. Rook takes e1. Knight g3 check, winning this pawn as well. And white resigned. Yeah, it was a chaotic game. So that was a great win though for Eric, who's was 2587 apparently at the time of this game, and Naidish was 2706. So it's a bit of a, taking out a higher rated FIDE player with the black pieces. I think that's a really creative idea myself. What happened in this game was amazing, that the knight was just left here for black to just challenge white's centre with c4. Fascinating. That's all the games I've got to show you this week. Hope you enjoyed them, got something out of them. I thought they were quite interesting. So that created a kind of unclear, dangerous position for both sides. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube. Hope you have a good week in chess. Thanks very much. See you next week.